Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Matt Tebow with Stacked, and right now I'm joined by TSM General Manager Parth, coming off a loss from TSM to Evil Geniuses. How are you doing, given the circumstances?
Not too bad. I think Evil Genius is a good team, and I think we just fell a little bit short today. So last week we just need to make sure that we get the next couple of games in to get in shape for playoffs.
What was it like watching this game as a TSM General Manager, given your history as bouncing from staff to head coach and back and forth? I imagine you have a pretty unique perspective coming from a staff member on an LCS squad. So what was it like watching on your shoes?
It's definitely interesting because I think this is the most, especially due to COVID. I haven't been at the office as much, just so we kind of constrain people to the bubble for safety reasons. I'm way more kind of from the outside looking into the team. This game itself, I think they had a slightly favorable draft, and I think Impact played really well. I think he played out of his mind. And so obviously once he kind of got ahead, it was really hard for us to claw back in any of the engages or skirmishes just because of how ahead he was. So props to them for pulling off a good plan, and we'll make sure not to give him that champion next time.
As far as TSM's been this season, a lot of the patterns of TSM has been kind of a very passive early game. The tempo picks up for the other team, and then TSM does something in the end, like a Spica steals Baron, or someone gets a few picks and they win a team fight, and then TSM barrels back. And that playstyle has left a lot of people really concerned because of things like Drake Soul being super important. Teams are getting it in 20 to 25 minutes usually every game. Should fans be worried about TSM's performance in the playoffs in such an early objective-focused meta at this point?
For sure. So I think it's a very complicated question, right? Because it's not like the players or the staff on this team don't recognize that Drakes are important, or we don't need to show up early game. I think the approach overall during this entire season has been how do we get all five of these players on the same page about how to play the game. And the biggest part of the game that I think generally is the hardest for most teams is how to kind of look at mid-game decision-making, how to play that game. And so I think a large portion of our attention, especially early on in the season, was kind of towards those aspects of the game. Early game is something that kind of is really variable based on draft and who has lane prime and all this the kind of things. And Dragons, once you have all the other pieces kind of in place, you just have to kind of reprioritize it as an objective. So I think a lot of the issues that we have are things that our players and staff already know, and hopefully we've kind of gotten some of the big hurdles out of the way in terms of how the team wants to play together, so we can now refocus on those smaller things going into playoffs.
What were some of those big hurdles you've overcome, and what are some of the small ones you're still working on in that case then?
For sure. So obviously the big ones are when you have 5 players who join a new team, the communication structure is really different, right? So obviously if PoE who played with Ignar and FlyQuest all of last year, let's say he goes into mid game, has a certain understanding of, oh, okay, I'm going to go into the side lane, and if I go into the side lane, then my jungle and support, I'm naturally going to know that they need to come up with me, etc. Whereas, say, Sword comes from a different team, like Suning, and in that team, Bin was the person who was kind of always aggressively pushing the tempo, he needed to prioritize vision on that side. So every player kind of had different natural tendencies based on the teams that they played on, and so we really had to kind of buckle down and reorient A, what are the priorities based on the champions that we're picking right now, and B, who is going to call what things, and kind of key designations for certain plays. Say, I don't know, you are looking for a herald swap, right? So everyone has a different understanding of what a herald swap means and what it's called. So just getting the terminology and all that communication structure and pace is the biggest hurdle for a new team. And then I think the smaller things are okay, now that we understand how to play the game together and can talk to each other, we understand that we're not prioritizing Dragon as much because we've been either prioritizing Herald, or we prioritize tower plays, or obviously there are other things that they think is more important, right? And so it's a simple shift saying hey, okay, going into practice, now we need to prioritize X or Y more, or just tweak those changes. So it's easier once you kind of have that foundation down to make those changes rather than not having that foundation in the first place.
Okay, so just from your two answers, I want to make sure I get this right. It seems like a lot of these things stem from like communication and then on to objective control. Like first figure out what everyone's doing, then figure out where you want to go once you know what everyone's doing, right?
Exactly. Like, if it doesn't make sense for us, our team to just be like, hey, it's more important to prioritize Dragon here if they're not going to know how to talk when they're contesting Dragon or all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
For sure. How much of the communication issues do you guys feel like you've hammered out in the past, 6 weeks now?
I don't necessarily think it's perfect yet. I think what a lot of people, at least on the outside, don't understand that it takes a long time to get kind of communication and the team working together. It's still spring for us, and it's still like I know it's almost spring playoffs time, and it's kind of time for us to start performing really well to make sure that we're in gear to go into playoffs. But especially this team compared to teams like TL and Cloud9 and 100 Thieves, who had a lot of like returning members, our commitment is to the long haul, and I see our team continuing to improve during this regular season when we get to play best of series, this playoffs, and then even the really long regular season that we're going to play of 27 games in summer. So I think this team, while it's really good right now, has a lot of room to grow, and that's kind of what I'm more excited for.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk a little bit about Bjergsen as well. I spoke to Bjergsen right near the end of lock-in, right near the end of lock-in. And it's been a few weeks. TSM's had time to mesh. You've had time to hammer out those communication issues we've been talking about. Because Bjergsen's so closely removed from being a player to being a head coach now, what's the effect he's had on this team compared to coaches who have spent a long time just as coaches and maybe don't have LCS experience?
Sure. So obviously, Bjergsen has a lot more. He has a much deeper game understanding, and obviously he was a big vocal leader on our team, so he understands what the players go through when they learn to pick up new champions, what they have to go through when, say, you're adapting your champion pool for someone else, how to play certain in-game situations. So I think it's a lot easier for someone in his position who already has that pedigree for the players to kind of buy into his system. Obviously, one of the tough things for him on the other side is since he has a player, he doesn't have as much experience on the coaching side, or especially structuring how we want to approach practice and improvement, and just how much time and effort it takes to create a plan from the coaching side, work with each player, kind of talk to each person both personally and as the team, and then kind of measure and track that progress, right? So he's learning a lot of the systems that go into kind of coaching, and so I think like the team, he's also kind of fleshing out and developing in his role, and we'll see what he's going to be able to do, especially when we are in crunch times or in a lot more serious situations like playoffs or even international tournaments.
Mm-hmm. One last question. What should TSM fans be thinking as TSM goes into the playoffs next week?
I think just being a part of TSM, it's always expected of us to do well and even win. I think usually anything short of winning has always been kind of considered a failure for us, and I don't think that changes anytime. I don't think that changes now. Every player on this team and staff has the expectation that we're expected to win, and I think that's the mentality they're taking into practice every day in every game. And we obviously this year we have some tough opponents in TL, Cloud9, and even some of the other teams who kind of have a lot more of their shit together, but obviously vary in terms of how good they can play on the day. I think spring season, everyone's kind of a threat, and you've seen that throughout all of the years previously. So we're hopefully just gonna take it one match at a time, like we did last summer playoffs, and hopefully we can land on top.
All right, cool. Thanks, Sigben. Once again, this is TSM General Manager Parth, and I'm Matt Tebow with Stacked. You can find us online at stacked.gg, and you can follow us on our socials like Twitter at StackedLOL. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. It really helps us out a lot. Parth, thanks for your help, and good luck through the next week in the playoffs.
No problem. Thanks, Matt.